Picture this: you're walking barefoot down the cold marble hallway of an ancient Roman villa. The sun is fading, the air is heavy with incense, and behind silk curtains, you hear women laughing, softly, secretively, but their laughter is laced with danger. Their beauty rituals are soaked in poison. Their marriages are sealed in blood and politics. Stay with me, because by the end of this story, we'll uncover how one of the most admired civilizations built its private life on foundations of control, cruelty, and power, and what that reveals about us today. The oil lamps flicker across painted walls, scenes of gods and monsters, lovers and betrayals. Behind the drapes, Adamina whispers to her slaves about tomorrow's beauty preparations. They'll mix rose oil with crushed minerals, smear white lead across her face to make her paler, and stain her lips red with mercury. It makes her look divine, but it will kill her slowly. She knows. They all know. But beauty is power, and power is survival. She glides across the hall like a ghost, toward her husband's study. Senators, merchants, and generals sit inside, waiting to be impressed. Every gesture she makes is rehearsed, every glance calculated. This is not a home, it's a stage. And every Roman woman is an actress in a play she did not write. In ancient Rome, intimacy, what we call love, desire, marriage, was not personal. It was political. Take the idea of pudicitia. It's often translated as modesty or chastity, but that's too simple. For a Roman woman, especially a noble one, pudicitia meant striking a dangerous balance. She had to be sexually available to her husband while remaining completely inaccessible to every other man. Not because she wanted to, but because her body reflected her husband's honor. Her purity was his reputation. One woman mastered this better than anyone: Livia Drusilla, wife of Emperor Augustus. To the public, she was the perfect Roman matron, modest, loyal, silent. But in private, she built a web of informants, listening to gossip whispered by slave girls in powerful households. She understood something chilling. In Rome, bedroom secrets could collapse empires. Roman marriages were not about love. They were negotiations, alliances between families, calculated moves on the chessboard of wealth and politics. A senator might marry his daughter off at 13 or 14 to a man twice her age. Their wedding night could be the first time they met privately. The bride would tremble as her mother painted her face, wrapped her in red cloth, not for celebration, but to mask blood. The marriage bed would be blessed with water and fire. It was less a union and more a transaction. In a letter from 97 AD, Pliny the Younger wrote about such a wedding. The girl, barely a teenager, had been taught to smile, to bow, to obey. Her husband, in his 30s, waited in another room. Women prepared her, whispered instructions she barely understood. Her childhood ended before the sun had fully set. Roman sexuality didn't follow the male-female binary we're used to. Instead, it was based on status: citizen versus slave, elite versus foreigner. A Roman man could sleep with slaves, prostitutes, or non-citizens freely, but touching the wife or daughter of another citizen without permission could cost you your life. In 48 AD, a man named Gaius Silius learned this the hard way. He married Valeria Messalina, the empress, while Emperor Claudius was out of town. When Claudius returned, both were executed. Not because of love, not because of infidelity, but because sex, in this case, had challenged the empire's political order. Slavery added yet another layer to this complex web. In wealthy homes, slaves weren't just laborers, they were tools of pleasure. Some were trained specifically for sexual service. Others were assigned to grooming tasks, like depilation, the brutal removal of body hair with hot bronze tweezers or sharp stones. One Roman poet described watching a senator's wife lie still as her alapilaria, a hair removal slave, ripped hair from her skin for hours. She didn't flinch, she didn't cry out, but silent tears streamed down her cheeks, her skin bled. When it was over, she was declared beautiful. And that, to Rome, mattered more than her pain. Cosmetics were deadly, literally. Upper-class women painted their faces with white lead, rubbed mercury into their lips, and lined their eyes with powdered antimony. We know now these substances caused infertility, nerve damage, and death. But to them, these were the tools of survival in a system where appearance meant everything. Ovid, the poet of love, even wrote a beauty guide. He told women to mix vinegar and lead into a paste for their skin. Walk through the remains of a Roman bathhouse, and you'll see more than stone walls. you'll see the architecture of desire. These were not just places for hygiene. They were social arenas, theaters of flirtation, and sometimes marketplaces of the body. Men and women usually bathed separately, but the corridors and adjacent lounges were where real negotiations began. There were whispers behind columns, glances exchanged across steam-filled rooms. A massage could become a proposition. A conversation in the caldarium could lead to a transaction finalized somewhere more private. Even philosophers complained. Seneca the Younger once wrote in frustration about the endless noise from the bathhouse below his apartment. Not just the grunting of athletes or the cries during plucking sessions, but the hushed voices of men arranging services that were never written on public signs. Roman depilation, the removal of body hair, bordered on obsession. Both men and women engaged in it, but for elite women, it was a duty. Wealthy households employed slaves called a lipolari, whose sole job was to remove hair using brutal techniques. Heated bronze tweezers, pine resin wax, and pumice stones tore hair away from skin until it bled. Martial, a Roman poet, described watching a senator's wife endure such a session. She remained still while her slave plucked hair from every inch of her body. Her face betrayed nothing, though tears rolled down her cheeks. The ritual lasted hours. When finished, her skin was raw and blistered, but smooth, as fashion demanded. Cosmetics made the suffering worse. Roman beauty products were toxic by modern standards. White face paint made from lead carbonate gave women a ghostly pallor that symbolized luxury. Red lips were achieved using mercury compounds. Eye makeup contained antimony, a toxic metal. These substances accumulated in the body over time, causing neurological damage, infertility, and early death. Ovid's beauty manuals were not warnings. They were instructions. He told women to crush cinnabar for their cheeks, blend white lead with vinegar for the skin, and to use honey and antimony for eyeliner. The recipes promised eternal beauty. In reality, they delivered decay in slow motion. When it came to controlling fertility, Roman women turned to substances that were sometimes more dangerous than childbirth itself. The most prized contraceptive in the ancient world was a plant called silphium, harvested from the coast of Libya. It was so effective and so valuable that it was printed on coins and sold for its weight in silver. Women took it in small doses to prevent pregnancy. In larger doses, it caused miscarriage. Overharvesting eventually led to its extinction. Other methods were riskier. Some women inserted wool soaked in vinegar or honey before sex. Others consumed brews made from iron rust, copper sulfate, or crushed beetles. Violent physical activity, hot baths, and even falls downstairs were used in hopes of avoiding conception. These were acts of desperation in a world where reproductive control was limited by danger and secrecy. Abortion was legal in Rome, but the procedures were often horrific. Toxic herbs like pennyroyal and rue were used to induce miscarriages. Mechanical abortions involved bronze tools inserted into the womb, causing intense pain, internal injury, and often infection. Pliny the Elder recorded one such case. A wealthy woman, desperate to end an unwanted pregnancy, consumed every known herb without success. Finally, a Greek doctor performed the procedure using metal instruments, while her family held her down. She died days later. The official story was fever. The truth was whispered only in the servants' quarters. Roman sexual morality depended entirely on who you were. A free-born Roman man could seek pleasure with slaves, prostitutes, and foreigners without shame. But if he was suspected of being the passive partner in a sexual relationship, everything changed. Being dominated sexually, regardless of consent, was seen as weakness, even disgrace. Julius Caesar was haunted by this accusation his entire career. His enemies claimed he had been the submissive lover of King Nicomedes of Bithynia during his youth. They called him the Queen of Bithynia in political attacks, suggesting that his military victories were compensation for lost dignity. Whether it was true did not matter. The implication alone was enough to damage him. Even emperors weren't immune. Hadrian's love for Antinous scandalized Rome. It wasn't just that he loved a man, it was that he mourned him so openly, building temples in his honor and naming a city after him. Too many Romans, this was unmanly, too emotional, too vulnerable. Power, they believed, should not grieve. Prostitution was legal in Rome, and like everything else, it came with hierarchy. Registered sex workers, called meretrices, paid taxes and worked in public brothels. Some were slaves rented out by their owners. Others were free-born women who had fallen from grace and now worked informally in taverns and alleyways. Pompeii preserved many of their workplaces. Inside brothels, narrow stone rooms with hard beds still display erotic frescoes. Graffiti from clients remained scratched into the walls. Some wrote insults, some left names and crude jokes, but some lines show flickers of something deeper. One inscription reads, "Restituta, you have the sweetest smile." In the middle of transactional sex, human connection sometimes still flickered. The Suburra district in Rome was known for its nightlife. Brothels, bars, and bathhouses lined the streets. Rich men visited in disguise, hiding their rings and wearing rough tunics. Juvenal, the satirist, wrote about senators and priests sneaking into these dens. They left at dawn, returning to their villas and respectable lives, pretending the night had never happened. Marriage in elite Roman society was less about romance than regulation. Contracts were detailed, cold, and often disturbing. One contract from 134 AD states that the wife must comply with her husband's sexual demands at least twice a week unless sick, menstruating, or ritually impure. Refusal could trigger financial penalties deducted from her dowry. If he made unusual requests, she could decline, but only if they caused injury or required more participants. Weddings were theatrical and symbolic. Brides were carried over the threshold to keep demons from following. Her hair was parted with a spear that had killed a gladiator, invoking courage for childbirth. Her clothes were saffron, her eyes downcast. She wept, not always from sadness, but from fear of what lay ahead. Roman poets like Catullus wrote of weddings with both reverence and unease. In one wedding song, the bride sits silent as older women strip away her childhood garments. Her face is painted with sacred clay. Boys scatter nuts and dates for fertility. Her new husband waits, drinking wine with relatives who joke about the night's expectations. She doesn't speak. She steps forward because she must. Divorce in ancient Rome was simple in law but brutal in consequence. Either spouse could end the marriage by declaring it over, but what came next depended on gender and status. A man could walk away with his property, children, and social standing intact. A woman could lose everything. If a woman initiated the divorce, she often faced public shame, financial ruin, and the possibility of never seeing her children again. Augustus, eager to enforce moral order, passed laws penalizing bachelors and divorcees. These backfired spectacularly. Fake marriages became common. Some men married slaves, freed them, and dissolved the union immediately to avoid punishment. Others married distant foreigners they never had to meet. Roman religion didn't just permit public sexuality, it sanctified it. During the Floralia festival, dedicated to the goddess Flora, the city erupted in color, dance, and excess. Theaters filled with naked performers. Prostitutes took the stage. Citizens who would condemn such acts at home now cheered them in public, justifying it as religious devotion. Senators sat beside slaves, pretending they were there for tradition, but everyone knew why they came. Martial attended one of these festivals in 88 AD. He described the crowd's roar as actors simulated sex on stage, while musicians played hymns to Flora. It was theater, religion, and pornography, all woven together. Romans believed fertility in the fields required fertility in the flesh, so they offered up both. Roman physicians documented sexuality in language that combined medical insight with cultural bias. Galen and Soranus wrote about female pleasure, not for the sake of women's health, but to ensure successful reproduction. If a woman didn't enjoy conception, labor would be more difficult, they claimed. Midwives were instructed to ask if pleasure had occurred. If not, intervention was needed. Sexual education reflected this attitude. Boys learned from male relatives, tutors, and sometimes direct experience with slaves. Girls were taught submission. They learned to endure, not enjoy. Coming-of-age rituals included sacrifices and whispered advice. For boys, this often meant brothel visits arranged by elders. For girls, it meant silence. Roman poetry gives us a rare glimpse into the emotional chaos beneath all this structure. Catullus loved a woman he called Lesbia, likely a pseudonym for Claudia Metelli. He adored her wit and beauty, but when she betrayed him, his words turned venomous. He threatened her lovers with violence, cursed her with humiliation. Love and hate danced together in his verses, inseparable, raw, and dangerous. Roman love was not gentle. It was a battlefield of dominance, honor, and fear. In death, intimacy did not fade. Tombs show couples reclining side by side, hands touching, bodies posed in gestures of eternal closeness. Some burial chambers included erotic frescoes and objects intended for continued pleasure in the afterlife. Whether this reflected belief or fantasy is unclear, but it reveals a culture where sex and identity remained fused even beyond the grave. Old age did not erase sexual expectation. Wealthy older men often married younger women to prove their virility. Widows were encouraged to remarry, but if they showed desire, they were mocked. Juvenal wrote of Ippia, a grandmother of 7, who followed a gladiator to Egypt. Her wrinkled face was painted, her body wrapped in silk. The gladiator took her money, then turned away in disgust. Her desire was a punchline. Slavery created the most complex and painful contradictions of Roman intimacy. Slaves could not marry, but they fell in love, raised children, and built families under constant threat of separation. Masters sometimes freed their lovers, but the imbalance of power never truly vanished. Pliny the Younger wrote about his slave Zosimus. He described him not just as a servant, but as a companion. They ate together, traveled together, shared confidences. When Zosimus died, Pliny freed his son and paid for a tomb. On the stone, he wrote, "Not my property, but my beloved friend." It was rare, it was risky, and it was real. Marriage in Rome came in forms that reflected power. Conferriatio, the most formal, was religious and nearly unbreakable. Coemptio was symbolic purchase, transferring a woman's authority from father to husband. Usius created marriage through time. If a couple lived together for one uninterrupted year, they were legally bound. These layers created a spectrum of relationships, some protected, others fragile. Even the architecture of Roman homes reflected sexual and social hierarchies. Public rooms were for men and guests. Inner rooms, where women and slaves worked, were more private. The most secluded chambers, where sex occurred, were decorated with mosaics and paintings of gods, animals, and erotic scenes. Beauty was expected. Violence was common. Children were part of this structure. Some households kept detailed records of slave breeding programs. They selected mates based on strength, beauty, and obedience. Births were documented like livestock. These children belonged to the master, no matter who their father was. The Roman army was no different. Soldiers were officially expected to remain celibate on campaign. In practice, they took concubines, raped captives, and formed temporary families. After sieges, women were distributed as rewards. Caesar himself wrote, after the siege of Alesia, that women were handed out like trophies. The sound of their screams, he noted, mingled with the soldiers' victory songs. Even Roman roads had a sexual dimension. Inns doubled as brothels. Entertainers and prostitutes followed festivals and campaigns. Sexual commerce was part of the empire's infrastructure, taxed and regulated like any other industry. Prostitutes paid fees. Brothel owners were registered. The state earned revenue from every transaction. Temples sometimes offered sacred prostitution. Worshippers could engage in sex as a form of devotion. Some priests castrated themselves in ecstasy, serving goddesses in neither male nor female forms. They existed outside the law, revered and feared. Magic, too, was sexual. Cursed tablets begged gods to drive lovers mad with desire. Potions promised passion, but many were poison. A man might drink for lust and die from it. The line between love and danger was thin and often crossed. And now, return to the villa where we began. Walk once more through its marble halls. This time, you know what those whispered voices meant. The rituals that poisoned women. The contracts that treated marriage like a breeding deal. The slaves who were never allowed to say no. The children who were married before they could read. Rome gave us roads, laws, and poetry. But it also built systems of intimacy rooted in control. Power was the architecture of desire. Love was never free. Bodies were currency, and sexuality was law. The people of Pompeii, frozen by ash, are not relics. They are mirrors. Their society was not evil. It was human, and that is what makes it terrifying. My closing thoughts. We like to believe we've evolved past the brutality of ancient intimacy, but maybe we've only made it more invisible. Today, power still shapes desire. Inequality still infects relationships. We've changed the language, but not always the rules. Standing in those ruins, hearing the wind whisper through broken walls, you might feel the truth pressing down like volcanic ash. that intimacy has never been pure, that love has never been separate from control, and that the echoes of Rome still haunt our most private moments.